My Safety Training Online presents Welding Safety. Welcome. What you will learn: applicable welding safety laws, welding safety hazards, oxygen and acetylene safety rules, personal protective equipment for welding, general welding safety practices, and how to deal with gauges and regulators. Introduction to welding safety. Protective equipment or clothing for welding, cutting, or working with molten metal. Protective clothing or equipment and face shields or goggles shall be worn when welding, cutting, or working with molten metal. Gauges and regulators and welding safety. Gauges and regulators used with oxygen or acetylene cylinders shall be kept clean and free of oil and grease. Welding safety, the closure of valves. To prevent accidental release of gases from hoses and torches attached to oxygen and acetylene cylinders or to manifold systems, the system's valves shall be closed when A. the cylinders are moved, or B. the torches, hoses are left unattended, or C. the task or series of tasks is completed. When welding, cutting, soldering, thawing, and bending occur with an electric arc or an open flame where electrically conducted extinguishing agent could create an electrical hazard, a multi-purpose dry chemical fire extinguisher or other extinguisher at least 2A 10BC shall be at the work site. With an open flame in an area where no electrical hazard exists, a multi-purpose dry chemical fire extinguisher or equivalent for the class of fire hazard present shall be at the work site. Use of a halogenated fire extinguishing agent shall be limited to the Halon 1211 class fires. Welding safety and ventilation. When these agents are used in confined and unventilated areas, precautions based on the manufacturer's use of instructions shall be taken so the gases produced by thermal decomposition of the agents are not inhaled. Before welding, cutting, or applying heat with an open flame to pipelines or containers that have contained flammable or combustible liquids, flammable gases, or explosive solids, the pipelines or containers shall be drained, ventilated, or thoroughly cleaned of any residue, or vented to prevent pressure buildup during the application of heat. Pipeline work and welding safety. When filled with inert gas or water, where compatible, or determined to be free of flammable gases by a flammable gas detection device prior to or at frequent intervals during the application of heat. Ventilation and shielding for welding. Welding operations shall be shielded when performed at locations where arc flash could be hazardous to persons. All welding operations shall be well ventilated. Protective clothing or equipment and face shields or goggles shall be worn when welding, cutting, or working with molten metal. Section 2. Welding safety hazards and possible controls. Electric shock from welding can kill. Any electric welder, AC or DC, has the power to cause electrocution if the electrode touches your bare skin while you are grounded. To avoid electric shocks, possible electrocution, personnel should take the following precautions. Wear dry, insulated gloves in good condition, as well as protective clothing. Insulate yourself from the workpiece and ground by wearing rubber-soled shoes and stand on a dry insulated mat. Do not touch the ground with any other part of your body and use fully insulated electrode holders. Do not use worn, damaged, or undersized or poorly spliced cables. Do not wrap cables carrying current around your body. Do not touch an energized electrode with bare hands. Turn off all equipment when not in use. Use only well-maintained equipment. Repair or replace damaged parts before further use. Wet working conditions should be avoided. Even a person's perspiration can lower the body's resistance to electrical shock. The avoidance of electric shock is largely within the control of the welder. The welder should be thoroughly trained on safe welding procedures. Safe procedures must be observed at all times when working with equipment having voltages necessary for arc welding. Arc welding can have voltages dangerous to life. Even mild shocks can cause involuntary muscular contractions. Miners using oxygen acetylene torches have suffered severe burn injuries because of misuse of or damage to torch hoses. Procedures should be established to minimize the risk of fire when cutting with a torch or welding. Special safety precautions are needed when cutting or welding in confined spaces or in areas with limited or no ventilation. Always check the equipment for proper working order before conducting welding or cutting operations. Always check that the valves are closed at the torch before turning on the gas cylinder regulator valves. Always check the equipment to be used for signs of wear or damage and listen for leaks. Always conduct work area examinations. Always provide good ventilation. Always wear appropriate clothing and protective equipment, and always light the torch away from your body. Section 3. Choosing the right personal protective equipment for welding safety. In this section, we'll talk about choosing the right filter lens for the type of welding operation. Shielded metal arc welding requires up to 5/32 electrodes with a shade factor of 10. Shielded metal arc welding 3/16 to 1/4 inch electrodes requires a filter shade of 12. Metal arc welding over 1/4 inch electrodes requires a shield factor of 14. Gas metal arc welding, the non-ferrous type, requires a filter lens factor of 11, whereas ferrous type requires a shade factor of 12, as does gas tungsten arc welding. Atomic hydrogen welding requires a shield factor of 14, whereas carbon arc welding requires a shield factor between 10 and 14. Torch soldering, a shield factor of 2, torch brazing 3 or 4, light cutting up to 1/4 inch, 3 or 4, whereas a medium cutting of 1 to 6 requires a shield factor of 4 or 5. When doing heavy cutting over 6 inches, you'll need a shield factor of 5 or 6, with gas welding light up to 1/8 of an inch, a 4 or 5. Medium gas welding requires a shield factor of 5 or 6. Remember that in gas welding or oxygen cutting, the torch produces a high yellow light. It is desirable to use a filter lens that absorbs the yellow or sodium line in the visible light of the operation spectrum. Section 4. Welding Safety Rules. Cutting and welding procedures shall be established to minimize the risk of a company fire. This operation shall be conducted by persons trained to recognize fire hazards associating with cutting and welding. Always follow your company's cutting and welding plan, and always wear appropriate personal protective equipment. Never conduct welding and cutting operations within 25 feet of combustibles. Always check the work area for methane gas. Always examine the work area for potential hazards. Always provide good ventilation, and always use suitable curtains to shield surrounding areas from sparks and molten metal. Always remove combustibles or shield them if possible. And always wet down the combustibles or cover them with suitable non-combustible material. Always ensure that the cutting torch is equipped with a check valves and flame arresters to prevent the flames from flashing back into the acetylene gas cylinder. Always inspect the area for fire and maintain a fire watch at least 30 minutes after work has been completed. Never apply heat to an enclosed vessel or confined space such as tanks, mounted tires, mechanical equipment with enclosed cavities. Never conduct cutting and welding operations when your company's fire protection service is out of service. Welding in confined spaces shall be avoided whenever possible. Welding in confined spaces should be avoided, and job safety analysis should be done prior to the commencement of any work. The proper personal protective equipment should be worn in accordance with the job being performed. Persons should be properly trained by each task by their appropriate supervisor. Establish procedures that require welders to cover metal with approved insulated mats or dry wood when lying to weld in confined areas. Ensure that maintenance activities are planned and possible hazards are eliminated. Provide the proper supplies and equipment to complete all tasks safely. Section 5, Welding Safety Summary. Before welding, cutting, or applying heat with an open flame to pipelines or containers that contain combustible or flammable liquids, flammable gases, or explosive solids, the pipelines or containers shall be drained and ventilated and thoroughly cleaned of any residue, as well as vented to prevent pressure buildup during the application of heat. The avoidance of electrical shock is largely within the control of the welder, and electrical shock can kill. Any electric welder, AC or DC, has the power to cause electrocution. Remember that all welding operations shall be well ventilated, especially confined spaces. Wear dry insulated gloves in good condition and protective clothing whenever welding. Thanks for participating from the gentle folks of MySafetyTrainingOnline.com.